Looks like everybody's trickling in, Jeff.
Yep.
Awesome. I'm excited. I'm always learning something, no matter how many times I listen to this. So thank you so much for doing this.
My pleasure.
Good afternoon, everybody. We'll give it about 30 more seconds for this webinar to begin. Good afternoon, everybody. This webinar offers closed captioning. To enable closed captioning, click on the live transcript button on the bottom of your screen and choose your preferred method. Welcome to the City of Chicago Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection webinar. Please note any website or email that I mention will be posted in the chat box. For those seeking business licensing assistance, you can visit the Small Business Center at City Hall or call 312-74-GO-BIZ. That's 312-744-6249. Also, business licenses can be applied for or renewed online at chicagobusinessdirect.org. If you are part of the BACP Entrepreneur Certificate Program, you can get credit for joining this webinar by sending an email to bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. If you want to learn about the program, please visit chicago.gov/businesseducation. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be available at youtube.com/ChicagoBACP. I will post all the above mentioned information in the chat box. We encourage attendees to ask questions. Please use the chat box to send your questions. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Please note that the views, information, and opinions expressed during this webinar are solely those of the presenter and do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of the Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection or the City of Chicago. Today's webinar is titled Transform Your Dream into a Real Startup, presented by SCORE Chicago. And now I'm going to turn the webinar over to Hannah Fernandez, Chapter Chair of SCORE Chicago. Take it away, Hannah.
Thank you so much, Marty and the Chicago BACP team. We at SCORE Chicago always appreciate and enjoy our continued collaboration. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Transform Your Dream into a Real Startup webinar. My name is Hannah Fernandez, and I'm the chair of SCORE Chicago. SCORE has been around as a resource partner of the SBA since 1964, providing free and confidential business mentoring for business owners across the country. So whether you are a new entrepreneur or you've been in business for a long time, our SCORE mentors could help you start, grow, and scale your businesses. To schedule an appointment with our mentors, go to our website at chicago.score.org. Now, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Jeff Nicholson. With over 33 years of commercial and investment banking experience, Jeff was responsible for client coverage activities of diversified companies in the central United States. He has had the opportunity to observe and work with managers and owners across a wide range of industries, from large public multinationals to small privately held companies. During 17 of those years, he was also a successful adjunct instructor at both the undergraduate and graduate levels in both management and finance. Jeff, you're on.
Thanks so much, Hannah. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for participating in this webinar. I'm going to be your guide today. I very much appreciate everybody listening in. I'd like to start with a quote. Entrepreneurship is like eating glass and staring into the abyss of death. Now, this was a quote from a guy who was once famous for borrowing money from his friends to pay rent. But he's also famous because he was a co-founder of PayPal, a co-founder of Tesla Motors, and of SpaceX. Yes, we're talking about Elon Musk. Here's a guy that went from famine to feast, and he knows this journey very, very well. And this is his interpretation of what it's like. We're here today to learn a bit more about how to start our own business. And we are going to cover a lot of ground today. It's going to be 1 inch deep and 1 mile wide. So please fasten your seatbelts. Many of you are here today because you want to know if you have what it takes to become a successful entrepreneur. Well, I believe you're leaning in the right direction if this is all you've been thinking about. If you are beyond determined, if you take criticism as motivation, if you aren't broke, and if you can cope well with stress. Because you see, if you actually make it, it's a very exclusive club. It's estimated that only 6% of the adult population in the US owns a business as their main job. But the downside of being exclusive is a potential disconnect with family and friends. Many won't understand what you're doing. They won't be able to relate to the problems you face. The demands for your time will never seem to stop growing. There's always more that you can be doing, right? There's always another project, an event, a meeting, a phone call that you could make. Why? Because in the end, it's you and only you. You are accountable. That's your job after all. Sadly, most of your family and friends just won't get that. And here's another fact often not discussed. Of the roughly 30 million small businesses in America today, over 80% are one employee businesses. And that percentage has obviously been growing the last decade because more web-based businesses are being launched. But being in business all by yourself can be a very lonely proposition. So you can't let loneliness burn you out. And to help, you really need to make time for family and friends. You need to plan it on your calendar for social time. You really should have a hobby as well as an outlet. And look for a chill out time that's best for you. You need to build a network for yourself, find a mentor. Score Chicago has mentors you can connect with. And find other entrepreneurs to interact with as well. And I suggest to a lot of people to consider a co-founder or a partner in the process. And we'll get back to that in a minute. But consider co-working places rather than your home. You can also look for online mentoring groups and networking opportunities. You could join or start what they call a mastermind group and use that as a sounding board for ideas as you're kind of going through the journey. Just remember that self-worth is not the same as net worth. Now, this picture is not a joke. This was actually drawn by an aspiring entrepreneur to help his family get a sense of what he's going through. There will be emotional turbulence. And I'm talking about bouts of severe anxiety and stress. Because you're going to have to juggle many roles, from salesperson to fulfillment manager to treasurer, and you'll face countless setbacks. Founders rarely talk about it, but many fake it until they make it. They struggle silently, but the hiding makes the whole thing worse. Now, this roller coaster will tempt you to neglect your health, to stop exercising, to not worry about getting enough sleep. Remember, passion is a big driver for success, but it can also consume you if you're not careful. So that's a little snapshot of what's ahead. But you should know at this point that you're in a great spot to be thinking of a startup. Now, this just came out last week in Inc. magazine. Illinois is in the top 5 best states for startups. There's the list: California, Texas, New Jersey, Illinois is number 4. Now, this was a study done by a company called Looka, who is a logo design and brand identity platform for entrepreneurs. And what they did was they looked at states and they judged them based on those 6 criteria. So the number of companies with fewer than 5 employees. They looked at the survival rate of new businesses, the percentage of new businesses to the total number of businesses. And then they looked at the affordable cost of living in each state and looked at the size of payroll for small businesses and the median household income overall within the state. And California was number 1 because they have the highest number of small businesses and the best survival rate. That's probably due to Silicon Valley. I don't know. Texas, number 2, is decidedly a business-friendly state. In Austin, Texas, they attract just countless legions of entrepreneurs. But Illinois, number 4, is certainly a lot more affordable than either coast. And Looka said that a lot of Illinois' outcome was thanks to the vibrant ecosystem in Chicago. And by the way, Illinois is the only Midwestern state in the top 10. So at this point, you've got a great environment, but do you have what it takes to capitalize on it? What qualifies an entrepreneur to be successful? Now, conventional wisdom says that most successful entrepreneurs have a great deal of passion, that's the number 1 trait. But the Founders Institute, which is a boot camp for entrepreneurs, they started back in 2009 in Mountain View, California. It's the world's largest boot camp for startups. They've launched over 4,000 businesses across 185 cities, including Chicago. They have a location here. But to get into the Founders Institute, you have to take a pre-admissions test to determine whether you have what the Institute believes a successful entrepreneur has to have. And you have to pass the test to get in. So what are they looking for? They're looking for 1, emotional stability. Someone who has high impulse control and can remain calm under stress. Fluid intelligence has nothing to do with IQ, but it has to do with quickly learning new sets of rules and being able to apply those to solve a problem. They also look for openness, which is creativity, curiosity, willingness to challenge norms, and appreciating what's around you. And then agreeableness. That's really a measure of cooperation and an overall ability to collaborate with others. Well, the Founders Institute believes that they have a lock on the DNA of a successful entrepreneur. Now, while the Founders Institute was launching businesses, a couple of venture capitalists and a McKinsey consultant decided they were going to test 500 successful entrepreneurs to see what made them tick. Now, what that meant by successful is that the entrepreneur either sold the company or took it public, which is a pretty high bar. And after they did their study, they determined that there were 4 primary attributes that all successful entrepreneurs had. And one was very dominant, and then there was a secondary trait as well. And it was pretty much along the lines of Myers-Briggs, if you're familiar with that format. So number 1 was heart dominant. And that's passion, sacrifice, and an unshakable sense of purpose. This was dominant in 65% of those entrepreneurs. Now, smarts is all about being rational, about being fact-driven, focusing on processes, setting goals, and holding people accountable. Guts is about taking action with conviction, being risk tolerant, and having a fire in your belly for stamina to endure the long haul. Remember, this is not a sprint, this is a marathon. And last, luck dominant, which was dominant in 25% of the entrepreneurs. This is not about gambling. It's about having a positive attitude, curiosity, a willingness to try to make your own luck, and to seize the day when luck drops in your lap. Now, Heart, Smarts, Guts, and Luck was a New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestseller. And I recommend it. You can get it on Amazon. And when you read through it, it's really a great self-awareness guide. You get to take a look at yourself in light of these findings and see where you might fit in the whole process. Now, you can go on the internet and find countless articles on traits of successful entrepreneurs. You've just heard what I think is the best summary that's out there. But let's get a little sense of reality here. During the 10 years between 2006 and 2015, on average, 33% of all business startups failed within the first 2 years. Now, over the next 2 years, on average, another 13% of those startups fail. So after 4 years, 46% of startups are no longer around. And after 7 years, only about 2 of every 5 startups survive. 3 out of 5 fail. Now remember, this is an aggregate of all kinds of businesses all in one fell swoop. So franchises, for example, are part of this scheme, and they have somewhere between a 75 and 80% success rate. Restaurants are in here as well. You know, after 5 years, 60% of the restaurants fail. So this is an aggregate of all sorts of things. But anyway, the key thing here is 2 out of every 5 startups survive. Now take a look at this chart. On the far left-hand side, you've got percentages. So and along the bottom, you've got the years in existence. So in the first year, you see 100%. So in the first year, 100% of the businesses survive day 1. But as each year progresses, the number of businesses that are surviving drops. Take a look at that graph, though. All of those years, from 1994 to 2015, which was the last time this was compiled, the slope of that line is the same over the last 20 years. The 2-year survival rate for startups since 2015, which isn't shown on this slide, averages about 69% compared to 67% for the last 20 years. So that's not really a big meaningful difference. But the point here is that it doesn't matter whether the economy is in a recession, in a boom period, who's in Congress, who's running the presidency. The survival rates are pretty consistent year over year. And our mission and yours is to help you become one of the 2 companies out of 5 that survives after 7 years. If you make it that far, the chances are longer term survival is pretty high. So what do you think are the main causes of startup failure? Well, Inc. magazine, they went to their 500 founders, which are the 500 fastest growing privately held companies in America, and asked them to think back to their very first year in business and identify what they thought was the biggest mistake or biggest challenge that they faced in that first year. And you can see number 1 was shortage of capital, 45%. Now that should be number 2 and number 3, and I promise to fix this slide next time. But the number 2, bad fit with other key employees, that is a distant number 2. So the biggest source of trouble for startups is a shortage of capital in that first year. Now, if you take a look at Entrepreneur Magazine or Y Combinator, I've compiled these 4 major themes for failing issues for companies. Now, Y Combinator is a startup accelerator out in California. They provide seed money for businesses. They help found Airbnb and DoorDash, for example. So they believe that having no specific customers in mind is a big problem for startups. This next one is a biggie. Most founders of failed startups don't quit their day jobs. Most founders of successful ones do. That's something about commitment. Now, few major startups, and I underline the word major, are founded by just one person. You know, it's interesting. Startups that have 2 co-founders usually raise 30% more capital than just a 1 founder business. And most successful startups end up doing something different than they originally intended. Pivots are big in successful companies. Now, if you look at Entrepreneur Magazine, these are the 4 that are most cited in that publication. Failing to research the business idea to see if it's viable. Underestimating the financial requirements or the timing of when they're needed. Working only in the business rather than working on the business. You know, particularly if you're a 1-employee company, you spend all your waking hours putting out fires and dealing with your business day to day. You have to make time in order to work on the business. And that means setting aside time in order to think about your marketing strategy, to take a look at competitors, to see if you've got a better supplier for the things that you're making. That's working on the business. And too often businesses fail because all people do is work in it. And finally, miscalculating market size, market timing, the ease of entry of other competitors, and the potential market share that really is out there. Success is the ability to go from one failure to another with no loss of enthusiasm. Well, this was a statement by Winston Churchill. Now, most people think of Churchill as being the Prime Minister of England when they defeated the Nazi regime in Europe during World War II. And his history, though, is a little different than that. For many years, his career in public service was peppered with lost elections. He joined political parties that wound up being on the losing side of elections. And so from 29 to 39, many people talk about that as the wilderness years for Churchill. So he knows about enthusiasm in the face of failure. Now, the point of all of this isn't to scare you, believe me. It's to help you avoid stepping on landmines. We want to help you navigate through choppy waters better and increase your chances of being successful. in my mind, startup failure is about not making something or not providing a service that enough people want or need, period. Now, Paul Graham, who was a co-founder of Y Combinator, which we talked about before, he said, the very best startup ideas have three things in common. There's something the founders themselves want. Number two, that they themselves can build. And three, that few others realize are really worth doing. So now think about your own startup idea. How do you know whether it has potential or not? Well, I think you start by asking these three questions and getting answers to them. Number one, does my idea solve a problem or create an opportunity? Who is my target market? And what value does my idea deliver to the target audience? Answering these questions objectively will unlock the potential of your dream. But objectivity is the key. You know, like it or not, your assumptions going into this journey might indeed be wrong. You need to recognize that your opinion is actually irrelevant. You need to learn to answer these questions with facts from the marketplace. And market research is essential for startups. Understanding the needs and wants of your target market will be the difference between success and failure. For too many startups, it can take years to find a fit in the market. And it's often during that time where they fail to get really solid traction that they start to run out of cash. Remember, that's the number one problem with the Inc. 500. So you need to use market research to gather information to answer those three key questions objectively. And that work has to be done up front in order to validate that your idea can find traction in the marketplace and eventually succeed. Now, market research can be qualitative, it can be quantitative, and these are the primary examples on that slide. And we're going to spend a little time on a couple of them. But before you start any market research, you have to decide, well, what are you looking for? And what you need to discover, you need to decide, what do I need to discover in order to be confident in my success? And one way to start is to clearly identify what your business idea is all about. And we call that a business hypothesis. And this is an example of what preceded Apple's introduction of the iPod back in 2001. Their hypothesis was people will pay to download music to listen in public. And embedded, as you can see on this slide, there are three key assumptions. B is the downloading assumption. Now that was validated by Napster, where millions of people, including myself, downloaded music for free, beginning about, 1999. C is the listening in public assumption, which was validated by the Sony Walkman and later the Discman back in the late 70s. So the real question centered around A. Would folks pay to download music? And that's where Apple spent all of its time and money in market research. Well, and you know what happened. So once you initially decide what you want to learn about, it's time to get out of the building and start talking to people. And you can start with family and friends. Some people say, don't do that. I say, go ahead. But you have to recognize you can't stop there. So the problem or discovery interviews are, going out to 10 or 20 people to discover how they currently deal with what your startup idea hopes to remedy. So you're asking them, How are you solving that problem today? What's frustrating about how you solve it today? Where is solving the problem in your priority list? And if you solve that issue, how would things be better for you? So you want to learn whatever you can from these interviews. And you really have to listen intently. And you have to avoid trying to sell them on anything about your idea. That's what the discovery interviews are all about. Now, after you've assessed all the information, if you think that there's a clear indication that you might have something, then you need to conduct 10 or 20 solution interviews. And here's where you need to add people, not to go back to the same ones, especially if they're family and friends. But you go to them, and your interview now is to tell them the problem that you're trying to address. Then you give them your solution. You provide kind of a high level set of features of what you're talking about producing. And maybe you give them an indication of what your solution doesn't do. Maybe you suggest pricing at this point. Then again, here again, you're not trying to sell them on their idea. You're trying to gauge their willingness to buy what you want to produce. And here's, in the solution interviews, that's where you may want to use a prototype or a minimum viable product for them to touch and to look at. But these interviews are a must in my mind before you get started on trying to start a business. Now, actual primary market research is very expensive and is normally reserved for larger companies that are already in existence. But online surveys have become a great vehicle to collect marketplace feedback. A survey tool platform is digital software that enables you to make and send a multitude of surveys out into the marketplace. They provide you with templates. They provide you with sample questions. Once the questionnaire goes out, they collect the data from all the respondents. They'll provide you filter capabilities and data analysis like graphs and charts. In the software, they also often provide what they call branching or skipping logic, which is setting up different questions in response to answers that you give. Like if you answer no, then you go to question 6. That's kind of the branching. So all of that is built into the software platforms. Now, these are 10 very reputable survey tool platforms, most of which have a low cost or even a free option for dipping your toe in the marketplace. So I put them here. You really need to check these out on your own. And most of these platforms charge $25 a month or less for their basic service. I think the most expensive one on that list was $59 a month. So it's very cost effective. Now you get the results in real time. So as people complete the surveys, you get that information. So the building of questions in their software has a great deal of flexibility to it. And if the respondents are completing the questionnaire in private, I think that fosters more objectivity than if you're going face-to-face or doing a mail interview. In the surveys, you could make them anonymous if you want. And if you have a ready-made list of people that you'd like to reach out to, virtually all these platforms allow you to import your distribution list in order to contact those individuals. If not, if you don't have a list, some of these survey platforms provide direct links into a range of social media networks. So you can use your own social media pages to post publicly and get people to connect and answer the surveys. Also, some platforms will also include links to access panels, which you can use as a source of respondents if you don't have any of your own. Now, these are some of the market research panel companies in the US. What's a market research panel? It's a group of people that are recruited who have agreed to take part in online surveys and other market feedback sessions. They have usually shared an extensive amount of information about themselves, about their households, and you can use that information to tailor the selection of respondents to your survey. Now, the panelists are paid or rewarded in some way, but it's not highly lucrative, but they have some reward. Now, you notice I've highlighted with a very faint arrow, AYTM. That stands for Ask Your Target Market, by the way. And AYTM is both a survey tool and a research panel company. It manages 60 million panelists across the globe. And they use 10 demographic criteria on their respondents, like age, ethnicity, education, but they also have 2,000 different psychographics to classify the panelists, like lifestyles, interests, decision criteria, all that. They've collected all of this information. Now, assume you have a survey of 10 questions that you need to get circulated. And let's say you want to get 400 completed surveys about your startup idea. To get 400 responses randomly across the entire panel universe without any choices of the kind of people you want to target, it's going to cost you $400. That's $1 each, which is pretty inexpensive. Now, if you wanted to get 400 completed surveys from, let's say, single women between 25 and 45 who work part-time and have salary in this range, that would cost you about $3,000. The point is, these panel companies are out there. You really should be checking them out so that you can gather the market intelligence to determine whether you've really got traction and your idea has a valid chance of success. Now, listening carefully to the marketplace can sometimes throw a wrench into the works, but successful entrepreneurs are always prepared to pivot. Remember Y Combinator saying that most successful entrepreneurs do something different than they originally started? Well, that's what a pivot is all about. It means fundamentally changing the direction of your business when you realize the current product or service isn't meeting the needs of the market. In 1891, William Wrigley moved from Philadelphia to Chicago to go into business for himself, and he wanted to sell Wrigley's scouring soap. And to enhance sales, he offered a small premium of baking powder as an incentive to buy his soap. But a year later, he concluded that the baking powder was actually more popular than his soap. So he started selling the baking powder and switched to a few sticks of gum as an incentive for buying his baking powder. Well, you got it. 1 year later, he knew that the chewing gum was more popular than the baking powder. So he introduced spearmint and juicy fruit gum and never looked back. Now that's what we call an entrepreneurship pivot. Validating your market, validating your idea with market research prevents achieving failure. There's nothing more wasteful than brilliantly engineering a product that doesn't sell. When you create something that nobody wants, does it matter if you did it on time? If you were on budget, if it had high quality, had a great design? Remember, people don't buy your product or service. They buy what your product or service can do for them. And market research gives you the answers. Now let's switch gears a little bit. Let's assume that your research has identified your target market and that you validated the prospect of real demand for your product. So how do you begin to determine the potential for your business? Well, I think marketing is defined really by answering two simple questions. What are the characteristics of your target customers and why do they buy? Now, some time ago, a guy came into Score Chicago, and he was in the business of selling proprietary handmade Cuban cigars to African Americans in the US. That's an interesting story because his father grew up in Cuba, and he had a lot of contacts with Cuban cigar makers over his lifetime. So his son, now starting his business, had a lot of contacts. So he had a website that was up and running. He had an inventory of 300 boxes of handmade Cuban cigars, and he had bought a list of 8,000 names of affluent African Americans that cost him about $3,500. And I said, well, that's great. Can I take a look at your business plan? He said, I don't have a business plan. So I said, okay, well, what are you here for? And he initially came in to see if he had enough inventory in order to reach out to the names that he bought from that market research firm. And so I asked him, I said, well, what have your sales been so far? And he said, I haven't sold anything. I've been nervous to reach out to these 8,000 people because if they really want to buy my cigars, I don't know if I have enough. I don't want to run out. So I said, okay, I'll take a look and see what I can find out. So in a little less than an hour, this is what I kind of came up with. So the Census Bureau said there's 30 million adult African Americans in the US at the time. The CDC said 7.7 of adult African Americans actually smoke cigars. World Tobacco said large cigars have a 49% market share, and machine versus handmade is kind of a 50-50 split. And the Cigar Association of America said the average cigar consumption is 2 per week, or about 104 per year. So when the entrepreneur came back, we kind of did the math and said, okay, you got 30 million African American adults, 7.7 smoke cigars, 49% large, 50% hand rolled, 104 a year. That's approximately 60 million cigars consumed in the US annually by this population. So I said, okay, let's assume for the minute that once you start, you eventually, over a period of time, capture a modest 0.5% market share. That means selling almost 300,000 cigars or 11,000 boxes. That's about $2.4 million in annual sales with just a 0.5% market share. So then I went back to his real question was, do I have enough cigars? And I said, okay, let's do the math with the names that you've bought. You bought 8,000 names. Let's assume 7.7 smoked cigars, 49% large, 50% hand rolled, 104 a year. That's 15,700 cigars annually. And how many do you have? You have 300 boxes, 25 cigars in a box. That's 7,500 cigars you have in inventory. But that 15,700 assumes that you capture 100% of the cigar smokers in the 8,000 names, 100%. And if you captured 100% of the cigar smokers in that list, you still have 6 months supply. So I said, you really need to get out there now and start selling. I didn't hear from him again. Now, I'll grant you that this appears to be a rather simple and straightforward example. But it's the whole point here is that if you've done a great job of identifying who your target market is. And in this case, it's very specific. You can always expand later. The more targeted you become up front, the easier it is for you to gather information that will be helpful to gauge your market potential. And recognize this was just about target customers, target market. It doesn't do a thing about why do people buy. Let's talk a little bit about sales. You should always be selling. You know, people talk about developing an elevator speech, which is all about you and your business in less than 30 seconds. It's really important that you really cultivate this. And the reason is you don't know that the person you're sitting next to on the L isn't going to be your first big customer, or who you're standing next to in the elevator is going to be your best supplier in the future, or who you're on the escalator next to is going to be your next investor. You just don't know. So you always have to be selling, and you have to get out there, and you need to network. Armed with a great elevator speech is a great way to begin conversations with people. And it takes a lot of practice to get there. But remember, 80% of success is just showing up. This is a quote from Woody Allen talking about actors going to auditions, but that's really the case. You have to get out there and network. And when you're doing this, you need to talk less and listen more. Remember, you're trying to get feedback from the marketplace. In this case, trying to get feedback from someone you want to sell to. So you want to know why they buy, so you could gauge your process and your efforts to connect with them. Most sales-oriented organizations that have training will tell you 75% of the time, the prospect should talk. The salesperson should only talk 25%. Excuse me. Many people are afraid to just go out and start selling. So oftentimes you have to give yourself permission to call. That's where dropping off a card, a brochure, sending an email, sending a letter gives you the chance to say, hey, I'm just following up on that card I dropped off, or I'm following up on that email I sent. So you're giving yourself permission to call. So you really need to start building your email list right away. You need to start doing it now. And you need to start developing a blog and developing content for a website. Now today, as you're thinking about how you buy, what do? You want to determine that the party that you're looking at to buy from is credible, that they're reliable, that they're knowledgeable about the product that you're looking to buy or the service you're looking to get. And so you do that yourself. You try to determine, how reliable and credible are they? And much of that can be demonstrated by having industry-related, product-related content on the website. And you can pay people to go into trade journals and other publications and pull information related to your service or your product and get it on your website to begin to give you credibility. And the other thing you got to realize is that today over 70% of all internet traffic is video. So if you're not on YouTube, if you don't have videos on your website, you don't exist. Let's talk a little bit about price. I think it's the strongest signal as to the value or the position of your product. Most startups will say, well, I'm going to price my product or service below the competition in order to attract sales. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but recognize that it's sending a signal that the value of your product may be less than somebody else's. I really think you should let the customer, whenever possible, choose how much to pay. And that's really bundling things together to create more value. So maybe you're selling a shirt and you can bundle it with a belt and trousers and, get a better price. Let the customer decide what to pay. Years ago, Sears doesn't exist anymore, but Sears used to have in their hardware department, they would have good, better, best. So if you wanted to spend money on a screwdriver, you could spend $5, $7, or $12, depending on the quality of the product you wanted to buy. So letting customers choose how much to pay is a great approach, and bundling is a way to get you there. Base your price on value, not necessarily cost. I mean, your accountant will say, what kind of margin must you have? Or here's what this price provides this margin. But value also is a major determinant. Let me give you a little complicated example. We were working with a company that provides product to companies, to contractors that waterproof basements and crawl spaces and things of that nature. And one of the products that this company sourced was a crawl space vapor barrier, which you put along the foundation to stop intrusion of moisture into the crawl space. Most of the contractors had these vapor barriers that were 8 feet long. And in order to install them, you had to tape each of the sections pieces together in order to have a vapor-proof barrier. And so every 8 feet, you were making these tapes. And it was also true that follow-ups for installed crawl space vapor barriers were usually because the tape came off and had to get redone. Well, the company we were working with found vapor barriers that were 12 feet long instead of 8. So that means that the contractor is going to have less labor in order to install, because they've got fewer taped edges to deal with. And secondly, they will have fewer failed tape sections because there's fewer of them out there. And so it really is a money saver to the contractor. And so instead of just setting a price, we also took into account the value that they were providing their contractors by having lower labor costs and lower up follow issues. And they were able to increase the price on that vapor barrier to make a better profit. And the other thing is, service businesses, you have to be careful. If you're in the service business and let's say you want to earn $50,000 as, let's say, a consultant or something like that, you kind of say, well, how many hours are there in a year? And it's like, oh, there's 2,000 hours in a year. And so each hour, in order for me to make, to make $50,000, I got to charge, $25 an hour. But the 2,000 is the number of hours that you work. It's not the number of hours that you bill. Remember, you also need to spend time working on the business, marketing, doing follow-up, all that sort of thing. So maybe your billable hours are only half of the hours that you work. And so that's 1,000 hours. So in order to make $50,000, you're going to have to charge $50 an hour, not 25. Anyway, we could spend a lot more time on price. Competition. You really need to know competition in order to determine whether or not your viable product will succeed. As a senior banker, it never ceased to amaze me how little small business owners knew about their competition. Whenever I first met a new business owner, I'd always ask the question, tell me something about your competition. And 3 out of 4 times, the owner would reply, you know what, I really don't have much competition. And underlying his answer was that he really believed there were very few companies that did exactly what he did. And of course, I'm thinking to myself, listen, if you don't have any competition, you got to be minting money. I think it's really critical that business owners take time to examine the competition. And this is particularly true with startups. Most business owners will remember competitors that they stumble upon in a bidding situation. Or maybe a client will reveal who else sent a proposal. But they don't take the time, they don't make the time to go out and identify competitors and look at them. I found that the most successful business owners and CEOs actually budget a portion of their weekly schedule to observe, critique, and explore their real competitors. And they view it as an ongoing executive function. So you should really, at this point, as you're moving forward, you should study at least 3 competitors. Figure out how your price fits in, what guarantees they offer, what advantages and disadvantages they have relative to your product and service. And you can find all of that on the internet today. You read reviews, you can find out what the weaknesses are of a competitor by reading the reviews. And Google reviews on their website, all sorts of stuff. You'll get a sense of what's really going on with those competitors. And so you begin to collect information on your competitors and then spend some time digging deeper. Obviously, you want to look at, their prices, their features, but another important source is trade associations. There's over 92,000 trade associations in the United States. And a trade association is a group of people that are paid by members in a given sector of an industry to support them, to do studies, to go to Washington, go to Springfield and talk about, the issues confronting the companies that are members of that trade association. But those trade associations will identify who their members are. They'll identify who's on their executive committee. And that's where you can begin to identify who competitors are, particularly if they're outside, your specific competitive area. And that gives you a chance to get in touch with them and find out what else is going on in the sector, whether they're a direct competitor or not. So it's really important to take a look and try to collect as much of this information as possible and compare that to what you're doing with your business or service. And that gives you a chance to begin to assess the competitive advantage that you have or don't. So once you collect information on those competitors, and you should be doing it on an ongoing basis as well, you go to take this webinar from SCORE. So you go to score.org, and in the search box, you enter Analyze Your Competition. And you'll come up with this, and you click on it, and it's a free course. And what this webinar does is it walks you through what they call a SWOT analysis. And that stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So this is a structure that allows you to collect all the information that you've collected for your competitors and put it in a form that makes sense and gives you an option to do something with it. And this is all geared to help you with building your business plan. Well, now it's time to change gears again. We're going to cover some important considerations for your business, whether or not you should form a corporation, all that good stuff. You know, I read somewhere recently that 70% of startups form their business as a sole proprietor. Why is that? It's easy and it's cheap. The problem is sole proprietorships do not insulate your personal assets from litigation. You're putting your personal assets at risk. And the same is true if you form a legal partnership. So you've got another founder and you're going to form a business and you say, well, let's set up a partnership. It's pretty easy to do. But each of your personal assets are still at risk. They still can be penetrated through a lawsuit. So we recommend setting up either a limited liability company or LLC, or setting up a conventional corporation. Now, a limited liability company is, they have members as opposed to shareholders, but setting it up, there's much less paperwork and record keeping than a corporation, and it's less costly. And you can still get conventional financing from a bank at some point in time. And the nice thing about it is you can be taxed in any way you want. You could be taxed as a sole proprietor, as a partnership, as an LLC, as a corporation, as an S corp. All of that is open to you. You can also structure that if there's more than one member, each of the members can have a different tax percentage assigned to them, regardless of how much they've invested. And the other thing is, you could be a member of a limited liability company and not have to put any money in. Let's say you're just offering services. Maybe you're going to be the accountant, or maybe you're going to run the cash register. And in order to give an incentive to do that, you might offer a portion of ownership as a member, and they don't have to put money in. That being said, members are viewed as self-employees, and so you have to pay self-employment tax on Medicare and Social Security. And that's true whether or not you're working for the company or not. Now, a C corporation is another option. And both a C corporation and a limited liability company insulates the owner's personal assets from litigation. And that's the real charm here. Now, with a C corporation, you can have multiple classes of stock. You can transfer ownership from, one person to another. But the biggest disadvantage is that you pay taxes on the profit. And if you're an owner and you take a dividend, you pay taxes on the dividend as well. So it's a double taxation. So what most C corporation small business owners do is they elect a subchapter S corporation with the IRS, and that takes the income of the corporation and puts it on the personal tax form of the owners. And you pay less tax, and you don't have to pay taxes on the dividend. But it's really central that you recognize you want to protect your personal assets when you start this business and not put them at risk. Now, once you've completed the forms that set up your corporation, you're not done. You've still got to deal with other issues. And the biggest one is really registering your company. You do that with the Secretary of State. Now, a proprietor and a sole proprietorship and a partnership, they do that at the county level. But you do that by registering your corporation at the Secretary of State. You do that online. It costs you some money. A lot of people think about the name that they pick, and sole proprietors usually have a do business as a designation. Well, you don't do that when you're forming an LLC or a corporation. That's your corporate name, so you don't do it doing business as. But you also need to make sure that you do a check on licenses at the state and the local level as well. I mean, we think of accountants and doctors and lawyers. Sure, they have to have a license to practice, but interior designers, nail technicians, athletic trainers, canine trainers. In the state of Illinois, they have to be licensed. So you need to take a look and determine whether or not your business requires a license. And that's not just true of Illinois, that's also true in Chicago. So you'll have to take a look and see whether or not there's a separate license that you need to have in Chicago. And those lists of license requirements don't necessarily parallel each other. But it's not always that way. Aurora, for an example, Aurora doesn't have any licenses. So you start a business in Aurora and you don't have to get a license. Anyway, if you're a franchise, you don't register with either the county or the Secretary of State. You do that with the Attorney General. Now, if you have employees, then you've got some other issues you need to deal with. For example, the labor laws. So you need to worry about workers' comp, unemployment insurance, OSHA requirements. Those are all the labor laws. Immigration, you need to worry about eligibility, and you have to keep records for citizenship and things of that nature. And obviously, for your business, you're going to have a federal employer ID for tax purposes. But when you have employees, you also have to get their tax information. You also have to collect and remit those withholding payments to the various jurisdictions. And you have to pay self-employment tax if you're an LLC. So you need to have all the mechanisms set up in order to deal with the IRS and Social Security payments and that nature. Now, if you're making a product here in Illinois and you're buying from a supplier, you want to make sure that you get an exemption certificate so that you don't pay sales tax on the inputs that you're buying from another supplier. So you're going to collect sales tax from your end user, which you'll then have to remit to the state, but having that exemption will preclude you from paying sales tax to your supplier. And if you're providing a product in the marketplace that has a barcode on it, then you need to get a unique company ID in order to produce a barcode for that product. Now we've put together a list. It isn't exhaustive, but this is a list of the websites that you should be familiar with and go to find out all the regulatory issues and hurdles that you need to address, particularly if you are more than a one-employee company. And this slide, along with all the slides, will be available to you if you sign in to get a copy, or if you see the presentation. Now, for legal help, aside from going to LegalZoom, the Chicago law schools provide low or free legal assistance to startups. And so the people that you would be working with are usually second or third year law students, and they're either supervised by a law professor or an actual business attorney. But you have to apply in order to get the help. And so there's an application you fill out, you send it in, and they will either opine yes or no to give you this service. I think the students that do the work are really very capable. I've had some of those in some of my workshops. But this is a list of the programs that you can go to find out if you can get an application and then get some legal help. Now, recognize, number one, that this is to set your business up, not to provide ongoing legal support. So once you get the business started, you'll need to get a full-time attorney to be at your side, and it won't be someone who helps set your business up. And the other thing is that you should try not to apply in the summer if you want to use one of these services, because there's fewer students in law school during the summer. And so you're picking from a smaller universe of potential students. So Don't apply in the summer if you can avoid it. Now, you can also go to IllinoisLawyerFinder.com. The Chicago Bar Association has a referral service you can also go to. But it's important that you know, depending on the nature of your business, that you get some initial assistance to at least talk through what might have to happen to set up your business and all that. And I think it's very worthwhile. You need to have a group surrounding you so that you're not on your own. And this is very important. You need to have a banker. I mean, obviously, you're going to have to set up a separate checking account away from your personal checking account for your business. But at some point in time, you may be in a position to borrow money from a bank. And so you should work at cultivating a relationship with a banker. We talked about lawyer as well, accountant, insurance agent. What you're looking for, to me, is what you look for in any good relationship. You want good chemistry, and you want someone who has familiarity with what you are doing. It makes no sense to me to be working with a lawyer that handles manufacturing companies when you're an online retailer. So you want to select an insurance agent that understands the specific risks that your business has. And picking someone who has a lot of experience with companies in your channel will be the best advocate for you as an insurance agent, because they understand the risks better, having had experience. The same thing is true with an accountant. You may have to go through, like you do dating, and it's an important part of the process and an important part of your journey. And certainly a business mentor. Come to SCORE Chicago, go online, but get yourself surrounded by people who are familiar with the nature of your business and are there to provide some help during your journey if you need it. Now, one of the things that you will get, again, if you sign up to get a copy of the slides, you will get a business process map as well. Now, this is a flow chart. It's about 5 pages long, and it was uniquely developed by a Chicago volunteer at SCORE. And it's a great reference to review because it basically checks all the boxes for all the different businesses and what has to happen to start. Now, not all of them will apply to you, and that's fine. But this is a great checklist to make sure that you're not missing something that's important. I know it'll appear daunting when you see it, but believe me, you'll want to have this at your ready because it really will help you walk through the process of things that need to get done so you can cross your T's and dot your I's. Now, if you are not subscribing to these 4 or not trying to, you're making a big mistake. Now, you can go to Entrepreneur Magazine and go online, do that for free. The same thing with Inc. But the Startup Magazine and the Startup Digest are free. And you can tailor make the kind of information you'd like to be collecting. And these people send emails to you every week on topics that you want to read about. These are 4 very important things. I subscribe to both Entrepreneur and Inc. magazine. I think they're a must. But these need to get on your list. Years ago, not that many years ago, entrepreneurs had to do everything themselves, or they had to hire people to do it. And with the web platforms out there now, you get a great deal of assistance to help you launch your business. And this is just some of the examples that are out there. There are new ones coming out every week, it seems. But Shopify, obviously you've all heard about it. It's an online shop builder. So they host, they automate tasks for you to make an online store. They integrate accounting, shipping, and other needs as well. They have somewhere between 60 and 70,000 stores on their website. So if you're selling a product, it's a good place to think about going. Square, obviously, it's that physical plug-in charge card for face-to-face charges. Stripe is a great product developed by a couple of entrepreneurs in Ireland. You know, a lot of people use PayPal, and that's fine for internet purchases and things of that nature. However, when you use PayPal, if you're knowledgeable, you know that your company isn't big enough to have a direct relationship with Visa. And that could hurt your credibility. But if you do business with Stripe, it doesn't say that you're doing business with Stripe. It says you're doing business directly with Visa, MasterCard, American Express. A great product. Squarespace, obviously is you can build a free website with them. Slack, if you've got a number of employees and you want some inner office messaging capabilities, Slack is a great product. Rework gets you out of the house and gets you in a separate location, and you'll get a chance to interact with other entrepreneurs. Gusto is a payroll and related HR service. Manage Hub is that's not free. And no, Manage Hub is free. HubSpot isn't, but HubSpot helps you to integrate all of your social media platforms together. And Manage Hub is a free service that helps you get your back office in shape. So depending on your need, looking for a web platform to assist you, there is often very inexpensive, if not free, services out there that will help fill your need. And I think these are the best websites to explore to get a sense of what your journey is going to be all about. So you can go to Score Chicago, startups.co, another great startup professional musings, a super website where you're actually reading from entrepreneurs as they talk about their experiences and difficulties. All Business and Startup Nation, two other great websites. The SBA has some great stuff, as does Gust. You really should start exploring these websites because they give you access to all sorts of information and things that you might not have thought about or things you're looking for answers for. This is another place to start. Now, I put together this list for incubators and accelerators here in Chicago. Now, an incubator, like an egg incubator, is hatching businesses. So it's all about startups. And this is about launching. So these are names of incubators in Chicago. And physically, what you wind up doing is you locate your business to a shared space with, I don't know, 10 to 20 other entrepreneurs. And there's no set time frame with these incubators. You use as much time as you need to in order to launch your business. I think I've read that the average stay in an incubator is 33 months. So some launch real quickly, others will take some time. But they don't always provide some small seed capital, but some of them do. It's usually a very small amount. But what they do provide is access to mentors and proven entrepreneurs and investors and other CEOs of companies that you can tap and use as a resource. Now, an accelerator is a little different. They're similar, but the focus is on scaling up an existing business. So you've already launched, and now what you want to do is get to the next level. So accelerators are what happens to that. Now that's a lot different because they have a very set time frame. Usually it's 3 to 4 months. And it's a class of founders together in what they call a cohort. And you all go through the accelerator process and graduate together. They usually provide some small seed capital and take a small ownership percentage. But they also provide you access to proven CEOs and investors and give you a chance to interact with all those and get your questions answered and things of that nature. So have this handy. The best way to get into an incubator is to network into it. I mean, if you just send in an application, the likelihood that there will be major interest is kind of tough. So you go to their website, you see which companies that they're working with. And then you can try to see using LinkedIn to, if you know any of the people that are running those companies, or if you take a look at their staff or advisors, and you try to use LinkedIn to network into one of those guys and say, hey, I'm looking at this business and hoping to get some help, and like to talk to you about it and see whether or not I fit with the incubator, that sort of thing. That's the best way to try to get in. Remember, these guys are getting inundated all the time with requests to be of help. And you need to find a way to leapfrog that, and LinkedIn is probably the best example of that. Well, let me end with a quote. No matter how tough the chase is, you should always have the dream you saw on the first day. It'll keep you motivated and rescue you from any weak thoughts. Now, this quote is from Jack Ma. Now, he, if you don't know, is a co-founder of Alibaba in China, kind of the Amazon of China. And he's probably the richest man in that country today. You wouldn't know it from listening to cable news channels these days, but I think that this is a great time for startups. Over 800,000 businesses started in 2021, and that's the federal year that ended September 30th. Hopefully I'll be able to update that with information at the end of this month. But that's 38% higher than 10 years ago. 38% more startups than 10 years ago, and 10% higher than pre-pandemic 2019. So I think things are really looking up. Illinois is a great state for startups. Your time is now. We were supposed to learn a bit more about how to start up a business. Now, I know we covered a lot of material, and I hope we accomplished that today. Again, I really appreciate your listening in. If nothing else, I hope I made you think. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Wow, that was a lot of great information. And also you have a total voice for radio. I don't know if you ever like hosted a radio show or anything, but I feel like you'd be very good at that. So we do have a couple questions, and then if we've got about 7 minutes left. If anyone has new questions, please feel free to add in the chat, and I'll go through what we've got now. A lot of them, I saw quite a few questions about if this is going to be online, and yes, in about 2 to 3 business days, this webinar will be available at youtube.com/ChicagoBACP. Again, that's youtube.com/ChicagoBACP. So that should handle quite a few questions. Let's see what else. How to fund a business with little to no money. I guess that's a question, like, is there, you've got little to no money. Was there a slide about people to reach out to for capital?
No, there wasn't, but I will tell you that BACP and SCORE Chicago do put on several webinars on funding for startups. I do a webinar for funding. And so we separated, there's just too much information. So we separated the
Yeah,
starting
absolutely.
from the funding, but there are some great webinars on funding.
Great. And do you know any of those incubators that you mentioned or any other ones, do they work with nonprofits?
Most of them do not.
Is there a business plan format? Like a specific format for business plans?
There's many, probably too many. But if you go to SCORE or the SBA, I think that's a great place to go to start to get a format. SCORE Chicago also has a business plan webinar that I think is very valuable to people to get a sense of what's entailed in putting together effectively a business plan. So that's where I would go.
Gotcha. And then I just want to shout out Hannah, your info from the chat to schedule a free and confidential appointment with a business mentor. Everyone here is able to go to chicago.score.org, and that's to schedule a free and confidential appointment with a business mentor. What information do you have on the Women Minority Business Certification, if any?
I do not have that much on that, but I'm sure that either BACP or a mentor at SCORE Chicago will be able to access that and provide it if you contact them.
That's correct, Jeff. We actually have a mentor specializing in helping women-owned and also minority-owned businesses get certified.
Great. Where do I go to change my sole proprietor to an LLC?
Well, I think changing to the LLC, you probably need to get in touch with a lawyer. It'd be my first advice would be to do that. I don't believe it's an easy process to be able to just do online. I think you've got to submit some documents. I'm not 100% sure on that. But I applaud you for at least considering changing from sole proprietor and would encourage you to do that.
Great. And then just, I know we're mentioning a lot of different webinars and stuff. I'll just give a plug to BACP. Our website, chicago.gov/business education, that's updated weekly with tons of different webinars and stuff that we, I know we partner a lot with SCORE, but there's, countless other organizations that we partner with as well for all different types of topics for these webinars. Yeah, I think we kind of covered all the questions I'm seeing. Oh wait, hold on. Here's a good one. What are some of the typical early hires a startup makes? What roles do you look to fill first?
My belief is that you need to do some self-examination first and to identify what holes you have. So for example, if you don't like sales, then maybe you should be finding somebody that is good at sales. And that's kind of my point. You have to do some introspection first and see what it is that would be a great addition to your skill set. That's where I would start.
All right, well, I think that about wraps it up. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, SCORE. Jeff, thank you so much for your webinar, and look forward to working with you again soon.
Good luck to everyone.
Sounds good. Great job, Jeff, and thank you, Marty.
Thank you, guys. Everyone have a great afternoon, great evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.